I go home every weekend back to Northeast Ohio, where I live, in a town called Avon in Lorain County. And I want to go home at Christmas, and I want to be with my 3-year-old grandson and my three daughters and son. But I also think our obligation, as Senator Durbin said, as the Assistant Majority Leader, is to stay here and get our work done. And get our work done means extend this payroll tax cut and extend unemployment benefits. If we don't do that, frankly, ruining the holiday season for tens of thousands, tens and dozens of tens of thousands, if you will, Ohioans and Illinoisans and North Carolinians. If we don't do that, we don't deserve to be able to go home and be with our families. I mean, I'm not trying to be a martyr here, but I just think it's shameful if a group of people, in order to protect the highest income taxpayers in this country, those making over $1 million a year, continue to block an extension, continuation, if you will, of this tax cut for working families. In my state, the average tax cut that we will vote for today and continue until it happens is about $100, $110, $120 per family per month. And it's absolutely unconscionable not to do that. Now, Senator Durbin also talked about the constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And I want to recount something I heard earlier today on the Senate floor. Two of my conservative colleagues from Kentucky, one from Utah, spoke about the importance of balanced budget amendment. I've supported balanced budget amendments in the past. When I was in the House of Representatives, I've actually voted. It was part of an effort to get us to a balanced budget in reality in the 1990s. So when President Bush took office, we had the largest budget surplus. We balanced the budget and then some, had the largest budget surplus in American history. I was part of that. I was proud of that. We accomplished what we set out to do. We accomplished what we said we would, and we accomplished, I think, something very important for our country. It was then, in the first years of the last decade, in 2001, 2, and 3, that we went to war and did 2 wars. Afghanistan and Iraq didn't pay for them. The President Bush in those days pushed through 2 tax cuts, one in 2001, one in 2003, that went overwhelmingly to the wealthiest Americans without paying for it, without offset cuts or other taxes. And then President Bush also pushed through in a very, very close middle-of-the-night vote in the House of Representatives by, I believe, 1 vote or 2 votes, a Medicare privatization bill that basically was a bailout for the drug companies and the insurance companies and didn't pay for that. That's why we got to this situation, unfortunately, where we've had this terrible budget problem. Now, but what I wanted to address, Madam President, is what the solution of a couple of my colleagues seems to be. And to their minds, there seemed to be a sort of a moral equivalence of on the one hand, protecting, or on the one hand, asking millionaires, people making $1 million and up, to pay their fair share, and making Medicare beneficiaries and Social Security beneficiaries taking big cuts. So I heard my 2 colleagues basically say this, that if the Democrats were serious about moving towards a balanced budget, and again, 15 years ago we did it. We absolutely did it with President Clinton, got to a balanced budget, got to a surplus. And they said if the Democrats are serious about that, they'll raise the retirement age for Social Security and they'll raise the eligibility age for Medicare. Let me tell you why that's a bad thing, Madam President. I was in Youngstown not too long ago, and at a town hall meeting, and a 63-year-old woman stood up and said, 62, 63 years old, she said, I just need to stay healthy and stay alive until I'm 65 so I have health insurance. I need to be able to stay alive for another couple of years so I can get on Medicare and have health insurance. Imagine living your life that way when you're thinking, I just got to stay alive until I'm 65, then I'll have good government, Medicare, health insurance. And so some people here are saying, well, tough luck. We're going to have to raise the eligibility age to Medicare to 66, to 67, to 68, whatever my very conservative colleagues are proposing from Utah and from Kentucky, raise the eligibility age for Medicare as if that's going to make them better. And, you know, when you think about it, I want 62-year-olds, it's one reason we passed the health care bill, I want 62-year-olds to have health insurance. One, it's good for them. Second, it's way better for the country, including taxpayers, that they get health care before they get sicker and sicker and sicker and end up in an emergency room or end up with cobbled together health care that's much more expensive, let alone what it does to this lady and her family. Second thing they proposed is to raise the eligibility age for Social Security. Now, it's easy for people around here, Madam President, that dress like this, that for all intents and purposes talk for a living and work hard at what we do, but talk for a living and work in offices and, you know, don't do heavy lifting and aren't exposed to the elements and all that. It's easy for us to say, let's raise the Social Security age to 70 because, you know, God willing, we'll still be here if the voters vote us in and we can keep doing this. And most of us are pretty healthy and don't work around asbestos and aren't doing heavy lifting and aren't working in the snow and the rain and in the heat. Well, you know, when I think about raising the retirement age for 70, here's who I think about. I think about construction workers. And I think about women that cut hair. And I think about somebody that works a waitress that works in a diner. Or I think about somebody that works at a factory in Brunswick, Ohio. And I think about people that walk the floors in retail. And we're going to tell them, we who dress like this, we who have jobs like this, are going to tell those constituents, and there are millions in my state, and tens and tens and tens of millions around the country, working class citizens of this country that simply can't work till they're 70. If you're cutting hair, if you're changing sheets in a hotel, and cleaning out bathrooms in a hotel, if you're working as a carpenter or a laborer or a sheet metal worker, if you're working as an auto worker or a steel worker or a non-union in a tool and die or a machine shop, you probably can't work till you're 70. Your body probably just won't be able to function in the workplace with the demands, with the physical demands and mental demands too now, to work in the workplace until 70. Yet people here think it's okay to do that. But people here, I would add, Madam President, can retire if they had 20 or 25 years in the House and Senate, can retire at 60 or 62 or whatever and get a full pension. That's why I've introduced legislation, not opposed to their balanced budget amendment. I think it's got all kinds of mechanisms in it that lock in low tax rates for the richest people in this country. I won't get into that. Senator Durbin talked about that. But I've introduced legislation that simply says if we raise the retirement age to 70, then members of Congress can't retire until 70. They can't retire with a pension until 70. Why should members of Congress be able to get a pension at 62 or 58 if they've served enough years? But a Social Security beneficiary shouldn't until a decade or so later. So, Madam President, it's important as we talk about balancing the budget, as we talk about our fiscal situation, not to make a moral equivalence between the richest 1% in this country paying their fair share in taxes, making that a moral equivalence to Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries having to endure significant cuts. And when some people around here call it in Medicare and Social Security entitlements. That's the way they can be really dismissive. We've got to fix entitlements. Well, you talk to people, you talk to a 72-year-old in Dayton or a 68-year-old in Zanesville or an 81-year-old woman in Xenia or Springfield, Ohio, and they will tell you oftentimes, this isn't really an entitlement, this is an investment. I paid into Social Security, I paid into Medicare, I'm deserving of, I want to make sure the government fulfills the covenant that we made over the last 75 years in the case of Social Security, 45 years in the case of Medicare, the covenant we made between our government and the citizens of this country. That's the importance of that, and we need to think twice. That's why my legislation was introduced in part, that congressmen and women can't receive a pension before the same retirement age as Social Security beneficiaries. We need to think twice before we're going to tell a carpenter or a barber or a retail worker or a steel worker that we're going to raise the retirement age to 70 and make them work until 70 so they can receive Social Security benefits. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.